Hello, and welcome to the Emerging Consciousness Global Online Festival, a kaleidoscope of voices and perspectives on awakening. Here we are gathering with transformative coaches, visionary artists, cultural creatives, an eclectic mix of wisdom keepers blended with colorful new voices in order to create a catalyzing space where curious people come for fearless and experiential learning. So thank you for being a part of this transpersonal movement to liberate minds, supercharge consciousness, and activate the farthest reaches of our human potential so that we can design a more peaceful and evolved world. My name is Tami Mensh. I'm a transformative life and spiritual business coach, the founder of Kaleidoscope Lounge and Coaching, and creator and host of this event. I serve people on a journey to fullness of expression, joy, authenticity, and deep wisdom. Those brave souls who sense that change is imminent and long to connect with makes them feel more fully alive and the gifts that they were born to bring into this world. And that's what this event is all about. And today I'm really excited and pleased to welcome our guest, Michael Meade. Michael is a storyteller, author, and a scholar. And he is a mythologist and has a wonderful podcast that I enjoy listening to so much. He studies anthropology, psychology, and he combines hypnotic storytelling, street savvy perceptiveness, and spellbinding interpretations of ancient myths with a deep knowledge of cross-cultural rituals. He's the author of Awakening the Soul, the deep cultural rituals, and many other wonderful books. And so he also creates the Living Myth podcast, which I talked to you about, and the founder and director of the Mosaic Multicultural Foundation, a nonprofit network for artists, activists, community builders that encourages a greater understanding between diverse peoples. So that's quite something. Welcome, Michael. Thank you for being here.
Good to be with you.
I love the topic that you selected to talk about today, which is the soul of transformation.
So, yeah, I think if you want to connect that to emerging consciousness, um, first thing that happened to me just listening to you, I was thinking about the connection between emerging and emergency.
Mhm.
They both come from the same place. And sometimes we have to be in an emergency in order to begin to awaken what's trying to emerge. And I think that's our place in the world right now, that the world is rattling on all kinds of levels and troubled in all different ways. And there's the climate emergency, and there's the COVID emergency, and there's the truth and justice emergency, and you could go on. And it's all happening at once. And then, so that implies something else is trying to emerge, something is trying to awaken. I always imagine that what we're looking for is somewhere deep inside, somewhere deep in the regions of the soul. I like to think about it as the soul. And so the word transform means to move from one form to another. And I think that's happening to us. Nature's having to transform because of the conditions, partially caused by culture, and culture's trying to transform or needs to transform because we come almost like to the end of an era, the end of a worldview. The world view that we had wasn't inclusive enough, it wasn't imaginative enough, it wasn't empathic enough, it wasn't kind of caring enough to sustain life. And so that causes the need for finding a new worldview in a sense, which is part of what's trying to emerge. And so the core notion about transformation for me is moving from one form to another. And you could say that the usual problem, um, why people can't change or transform, involves failing to leave the old form behind. So that, someone wants to change their life, but they want to let go of anything. They just want to have some change. And then it turns out we're dragging corpses along. And that's, I think, the big struggle inside the culture is how do we let go the corpses of the practices and the formulas that don't work anymore? And how do we enter that in between space, which they used to call liminal territory? Liminal comes from the Latin word limen, which is the bottom of a threshold. And so you could say, in a way, the world as we knew it is already gone. We can't go back to it, despite what some people are trying to do. And we're on the limit or the threshold between what has disappeared and what's trying to appear. And that's another way to consider the emergence. And so the difficulty with that is it's radical. It's difficult to be standing and facing the unknown, whether it's the unknown trying to awaken from within or a message trying to come from without. Most of us have not been educated to be comfortable standing in that not knowing position, waiting as if for the birth to occur or the delivery system to arrive. And I think that's a way of understanding some of the tension that we're in. Um, so I'll just want to say this also about that. Being a mythologist, I've been studying ancient things for a long time. Now, to me, ancient things are also immediate. If a person is fully engaged in their life, it's surprising how the ancient things wind up being present. But at the same time, I feel like I've been kind of angled towards looking back, trying to help the ancient things find placement in the present. Now I find myself much more alert to what's coming from the future. And so the idea is, in a sense, not that we just get a new view and here we all go. It's actually that the future is trying to reach us in a funny way. And there's a whole thing inside mythology where you never have to go all the way. The seeker just has to go far enough down the path that the other world, as they used to call it in all kinds of ancient cultures, the other world begins to move towards us. So maybe that's a way to understand the emergent is partly something present arriving or arising in us, and then partly something unseen that comes to meet what emerges in us. Just a few thoughts about that.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're trying to bring about in this gathering that we're having here is, where are we, what is emerging, and where do we go from here, and I love the way you put that, where we're bringing the ancient, and we're looking towards the future, and we're meeting in this place, and what are we letting go of, and what is seeking us, what's next for us. So what do you see as the way forward for us?
So going back to something you said, part of the way forward is always about the individual. So the old idea is that um, the future is born in the individual soul, not the whole thing. That's the kind of danger of the hero's journey, in a sense, is that the heroic idea is someone thinks it all comes from them. That's not exactly what happens. Part of it comes through each person. When it's going to be a renewed or new vision of the world, it's going to have many eyes and many sites of orientation. So I wrote a book called The Genius Myth, which was to suggest that it's not always a heroic journey. That so genius, the old meaning of the word genius, is the spirit that's already there. So the old idea was everyone, not that everyone is a genius, but everyone has some genius. And the genius is the spirit that they entered the world with. And so the emerging thing is emerging from a spirit that's already inside somewhere. One of the old sayings was, a human being is a dream or a vision placed in a soul around which a body is shaped. So we are carried into the world by something unseen. People see the infant coming, but inside the infant is a soul, and inside the soul is the genius or the spirit of the person. And so part of it is a deeper awakening of that individual spirit. The notion being, if I can get a vision of my life purpose, life path, which the old assumption is everybody has that, and I follow that path, then I'm bringing something into the world that wasn't there. You had mentioned the gifts of the individual. I have something to give to the world, and that's changing the world. As a matter of fact, when someone learns how to give their gifts, it changes the people near them. It affects them. And so the genius myth idea is that the world is so broken culturally, so rattled in terms of nature, that no one answer, no one vision, no one person can solve it, or system of belief. But if a lot of people awaken to their own, given path and the kind of capacity that they have to creatively bring things into the world, then the world will change by virtue of all those awakenings. So that's so no one has to be the hero. No one has to be the savior. Everybody, the old idea is we're not here to save the world, we're here to save ourselves. If a person saves themselves by becoming themselves, and the more people who become a genuine version of themselves, then the more things start to get fixed. Because some people's gifts go right to the world of nature, where people know how to work with mushrooms, and another person's gifts goes right into the classroom, or some teaching experience because they're a born teacher, and someone else actually knows how to work with people that are dying, and someone else knows how to help a forest give birth to itself, and all of a sudden things are changing, and no one has to bear the weight of the whole thing.
Right.
So that's,
Yeah, everyone's gifts are needed.
yeah.
And how would you say um, the what is the best ways or a way for people to come in contact with that if they might not know what that is?
Well, there's a legitimate struggle there because of what has happened in the modern world. Big issues that have been avoided. So it starts for me with the idea that there's two notions about the human soul. One is that it's empty, and everyone comes into the world empty. And then the family writes on a person, and the community writes on them, and the school writes on them, and they become the sum of all those impressions. That's the modern idea. The ancient idea was everyone comes in gifted and aimed. Everyone comes in with a natural capacity to give and to make, and then everyone is aimed. In other words, everyone is purposeful from the inside out. And so, because the modern idea is that everybody's empty, most people are wandering around not knowing what they're here for. And when you want to look at like the rise of conspiracy theories, part of what happens there is people don't know who they are. So they're willing to believe anything. That's how the wrong people get elected too. People elect people who will never know who they are. And so the trick is to figure out who we each are. And that is not easy because it's completely overlooked by even American culture, which is supposedly about the individual, but it's not really about the soul of the individual. And so it's understandable people haven't found it. And then there's a second issue, which is in traditional cultures throughout the world, um, when a girl or a boy reaches adolescence, early youth, there would come the end of childhood, and there would be a rite of passage through which they entered the world as a kind of the birthing or the emergence of their genuine self, so that the culture misses the idea of the uniqueness of each individual soul. And then the lack of rite of passage or initiation means that there's no conscious process through which a young person gets to know who they already are. When I work with young people, I always have to work through the idea that they've been told that they have to make something of themselves. I always say, you already are something. It just hasn't awakened yet. So, so then there's two paths, I think, two immediate paths for finding out what's the nature of that inner self that is natural to me and what are its gifts. One is to follow any kind of trail where the gifts were experienced. A quick story. I was 13 and a half years old when I got cornered in the bathroom of a movie theater. I was growing up in a rough part of New York, and I was thrown into the bathroom, and I was surrounded by 7 members of a gang that were older than I was, and they had gotten the wrong idea that somehow my friend has caused some trouble with them. They couldn't find him, so they grabbed me, they threw me on the floor, they pulled out their knives, and they're about to carve me up, and they had a history of doing that. And so it could have been the end of could have been a short life. And what happened is, without any preparation, rehearsal, or any idea that it was coming, I started telling a story. And the story was so compelling, they forgot to hurt me. And they actually let me go. So now I'm walking around the street going, I just found something more powerful than weapons. And it was the idea of how compelling a story could be. And that just came from the inside. It's almost as if my ego got so scared it departed, and what was left there was this thing that was trying to awaken anyway. So
Right.
not everybody has that dramatic a story, but that's what's missing for most people. So if a person can even look at any time they had a scrape with death or something that where they could have completely been lost, whatever got you through that, that's part of the genius, that's part of the giftedness. So that's one way to find it. And then Carl Jung said, the psychologist, said that genius hides behind the wound. So if you can't find the examples of giftedness, just go to the wounds. Everybody has wounds, and you go to the wound and the genius is right nearby. The gifts are right nearby. So this is a radical philosophical and psychological idea that the two deepest things in the soul of a person, in a sense, are both their gifts and their wounds. And to go back to the idea of initiation or rite of passage, whether it was the girl or the boy coming along, they would have a process through which each young person was helped into a creative way to deal with their gifts that were trying to awaken and their wounds that needed healing. Because all children get wounded in the course of life. And so we're supposed to have had an experience of awakening to the nature of our gifts and the kind of wounds we have. And most people haven't had that. And so that's one reason so many people are so lost and willing to believe in all kinds of outlandish things. So I don't know if that helps, but that's how I think about it.
Yeah, yeah, and that those things are so closely intertwined, um, and it's also a bigger, microcosm of the macrocosm of where we are now, in this, this desire for a collective rite of passage that we seem to be needing or wanting to go through at this time. Um,
Exactly that. Very rare. I mean, I've been around for a while. I've only seen one other occasion where there was a potential for a collective awakening. And it's painful because you see that the awakening involves the wounds. That's what's going on with Black Lives Matter. That's what's going on with the truth and justice. All of those things are old wounds. In America, where I am here, I think you are, you have here one of the biggest wounds is racism, but you also have misogyny. All that stuff back up at the same time. Some people thought it was dealt with. Well, it's back. Well, that tells you we're closer to the gifts. If people could just accept that we have to face some of these wounds and we have to try to heal them together, we have to be generous and empathic about that, then what happens is the gifts just appear because they were actually obscured. Back to Jung, genius hides behind the wound. And so yeah, we're in the wounded state, which is the state of potential emergence. And what happens is when you take care of the wound, when you heal the wound becomes the womb and
Mm,
the birth that comes
mm,
out of the healing.
yeah.
And so it's a very challenging time to be alive. It's a painful time to be alive. But then again, most birth goes through labor pains. And you could say, hopefully, we're somewhere in the birth canal on a connective level. And the idea is to birth a world that's more welcoming to everyone.
Right. And I thinking about you bringing about the ancient mysteries into now, and I'm thinking what the ancient mysteries may be now, and where are we in that, that process.
Well, the core there for me would be the old mystery. Hmm, so mythology is like an interest more in mystery than history. History tries to say what happened, and mythology opens up all the stories of what happened. And at the core of all that stuff is the mystery called life, death, renewal, or birth, death, rebirth. So the idea is that a person has to be born more than one time. The first birth is the infant coming into the world very defenseless and very dependent, and opening its eyes 2020, 2030, whatever, and seeing the world at that level. And then what I was talking about as rites of passage or initiation is the opening of the eyes of the soul. And a person sees not just with literal eyes, but they see with the inner eyes of spirit and soul, which actually reveal to them what the world is about for them. And so then something similar in a way happens on the collective level. There needs to be this kind of rite of passage through which we get a greater vision. And I can't say what that vision is. Some way that you can see it is by looking at what's absent in the world right now. So when you look at the world now, you say, well, there's an absence of willingness to accept and welcome everyone as they are. There's a absence of respecting and understanding the feminine. There's an absence of respecting and understanding the intricate workings between culture and nature. There's an absence of respecting and being in awe of the process of nature, which is life, death, renewal. And so through that mystery, you can start to get the sense that we are in a ritual of trying to rebirth both nature and culture and the relationship between them. And diversity is a key to nature, and therefore it's a key to culture. So those are things that you could imagine because they're absent. Then there are other things that who knows, that no one has imagined in a long time, or no one has imagined before. I don't know. That's part of the wonder of it. Once you accept the struggle of it, then a little bit more. There's a story that I love, the Native American story, which is called How Healing Ceremonies Began. And there's a part in the story where people have gotten sick and no one knows how or why, because it's back at the beginning and no one knows anything. It's kind of like COVID-19. And and so these four people decide to go out in the evening, when the world is becoming darker, and they go out each evening at dusk, and they each look in a different direction into the darkness. And then the story says the one who made the world begins to talk to them. And the first thing that the one who made the world says to them is, listen, in this world, for every illness, there's a cure. For every sickness, there's an antidote. For every trouble, there's a solution. And so then they had knowledge. That was the first knowledge, is the knowledge of healing. And then it goes on from there. But from that, I've taken the idea of standing on the threshold between day and night and looking into the darkness and realizing that things could come to us that way. And if a person realizes that they have an inner spirit that is gifted and aimed at something, things will come in alignment with that aim. So that's a story that I love because it says it's all right not knowing, and it's all right looking into darkness with the understanding that the world gives birth to itself again and that a person is born again and again.
That is a powerful thing to think about right now when there is so much, uncomfortableness with not knowing, and
Yeah.
knowing that there's so much that can come from that. And and then I know that you just your latest book you wrote, it's called Awakening of the Soul,
Yeah.
um, a deep response to a troubled world. And so why did you title it that?
Well, um, I was thinking about what they used to call the undersoul. So, so the difference between spirit and soul, so to speak, is spirit's connected to fire and air, and it ascends, and it tends to ascend towards the one, towards the universal. We call it the spirit. Soul is connected to water and earth, and it descends, and in its descent, it becomes multiple. So soul is about all the iterations and all the different things, and something that's soulful includes all the down stuff and all the weird stuff and all the connective stuff. Soul is the secret connective tissue of the world. And so I was thinking about how could a world get into this much trouble? And the only way I could figure it was loss of soul, that many places in the world have a loss of soul. If you think about uh, racial inequities and that kind of stuff, that's a loss of soul, because soul connects everybody to everybody, just the way mushrooms secretly connect all the trees and everything on the ground. You can't see it, but they're there. And you can't see soul, but you know when it's not there. And so I decided to focus on soul. And then I was thinking about how um, the old idea that the soul is undaunted. We can be defeated easily. We can be overwhelmed nowadays with anxiety, with fear, with all kinds of stuff. But the soul is undaunted. And so I was thinking about that. And then I remembered this, this, so paper comes from ancient Egypt and from what was called the papyrus plant. That's where we get the word from. And the paper was originally made from pounding the tissue of the papyrus plant. And then it happened that there's a bunch of these old manuscripts from the beginning of papyrus that survived for thousands of years. And one of them is a fragment in which a poet of ancient times is lamenting how the world is falling apart and the society is unjust and people are doing violence, in this wild lament where he decides that he might as well die, that he doesn't want to live, which could be any one of us any day right now. And as he reaches that point, his soul talks to him. In Egypt, they called it the basol, B-A, basol. Um, and the soul actually talks to him and says, that's not the right way to look at this. You came here to do something meaningful. Why don't you get back to doing what's meaningful for you? And you and I will then do that together. And in the end, we'll leave the world when it's the right time. And so he responds to that. Well, you don't really know. He responds, and then it's a fragment. So it's torn, and you don't know what happens to him. But I thought about that. I thought about, here's this 3,000-year-old fragment of papyrus that has lasted this long, delivering this message that our soul is trying to tell us to keep going and do what we were intended to do. And that's the beginning of the book. That's how I begin the book, with that fragment. And so that's soulful to me. That's the soul. The soul is making the ancient immediate. There's an ancient story that's a story we need right now. So that's how I got into that book.
Love that. I love that. I feel that with you. How do you know when it's your soul that's speaking to you?
Yeah, people ask that. To me, that seemed kind of evident, but
Mm.
but not really. So, um, hmm. All right. So where I go with that is to the muses. So the muses are, spirits that live on the side of mountains. that have all these capacities. From muses, we get the word music. We get museum from muses. We get humor. Amusing comes from humor. So these are all the qualities that come with these feminine spirits that are considered in the traditional stories to be on the sides of mountains, as if they weren't just the voices of the mountain, they were the voices of the paths through which you could climb the mountain. So for me, starting at 13 and a half years old, slightly before that actually, I was getting messages from somewhere, and I eventually decided it was the muses. Anyone who does art, anyone who does music, anyone who's creative in any way is actually being inspired by the muses. This was the old idea. Um, it's not just we ourselves, we're like lined up with stuff. And so for me, that became part of understanding that I could hear something being said that was not quite me, although a part of me that knew more about my life than I did. Like part of me knew that I was supposed to be telling stories. I didn't know that. So I began to just trust that. There's another way to consider it that, people say they have a little bird on their shoulder that tells them something, or, in crises, if we listen, the soul is speaking like it does through that manuscript. And the problem is with all the confusion, all the self-doubt, all the insecurity, and now all the distractions, we often don't hear the voice. But in an emergent moment, if a person can still themselves enough, they'll hear the voice. And the voice is related to this inner muse that knows why we're here. I mean, if there isn't an arrangement like that, like everyone is gifted, not just the kids in the gifted class, um, everyone has soul, everyone has purpose. If that's not the case, then we're in bigger trouble than we even think. So, and it's also, I think, when you start thinking about the soul and the message of the soul, there's the implication right away that the ego really can't handle this. The ego is the kind of the thing we put together to show other people, and it's okay, but it really can't do it. And so when you start talking about the soul and the voice of the soul, then we're moving away from the limitation of the ego. And so I know people struggle with that, but honestly, if a person in the midst of trouble will quiet themselves enough, there's usually either some little voice coming from inside, or a bird comes by literally and says, go that way. So I think people have to learn to trust that, because trusting in the kind of acculturated systems has gotten us to where we are.
Yeah, yeah, and just to slow down and to be able to hear that, and what antidotes do you have for the anxiety and overwhelm that gets in the way of that?
Yeah, that's a big thing right now, because partly because the anxiety is not strictly personal. That's what's going on now. You have collective anxiety. The
Mm.
world doesn't make sense. And so people are feeling more anxiety than you normally would as a person. If you have a test coming up, you're anxious. It's actually natural. But now people are absorbing collective anxiety. And so it's really a time to trust something within. I mean, where people get really lost is all this pressure and chaos is coming from the outside. If I can't turn in and find some refuge, then I'm really in trouble. How to do that becomes really connected to practice. And so it's hard to get real specific about it, but there's two big roads of practice. One is the contemplative road. So that's meditation and all those kind of settling, quieting, connecting to the stillness, because in the deep self, when the self or the soul is present, there's stillness, and then the other road is creativity. So all the arts are the creative road. So they're like opposites. One is the meditative, contemplative route to the stillness within, and the other is the expressive route of the arts. Most people have some of both. and we often need both. So one thing to cultivate is whatever practice gives a person a, a, an association with and connection with stillness. That's a form of refuge. The other side, though, is whatever gives a person an opportunity for genuine expression. So I was mentioning the music, the muses and music. This is a time anybody wants to learn an instrument, do it now. Anybody who loves singing but doesn't sing, start singing. Most people aren't near you anyway. They're going to stay 6 to 15 feet away. So even if you sing badly, they won't feel it too much. I'm joking, but you know what I'm saying. Everybody has natural inclinations to the practices. And for some people, it's going to be mostly contemplative or meditative. For others, it's the sooner I get this expression out, the better. So I'm feeling anxious or something, I turn that into art, I turn it into music, I turn it into painting. And it's never been or shouldn't have to be, do I get successful at it? Successful is becoming oneself. It doesn't matter if there's awards given. The award comes from inside in the form of self-worth. And so both of those things could be helpful. And a person just has to get to know themselves a little bit. I think it's time for me to be quiet, or I'm going to write 3 songs and sing them as badly as I can. Whatever. I'm joking, but because the expressive arts don't require perfection. That's a huge mistake. It really requires expression.
Right. But the process, you know, of the release and the connection and that you have with that energy and then knowing how to tap into it, you know, is extremely important. And it creates a way that you can go with the flow, you know,
You
and
have movement, you
with
have
that.
capacities. You
Yeah.
can either flow to stillness or flow to expression. We're not then see the ego is the part of us that is overwhelmed almost all the time now. There's they call it the information age, but you could also call it the misinformation age. There's just too much information and too much misinformation, and people get overwhelmed. And so, but that's the ego getting overwhelmed, because imagine the inner creative agent or the inner artist could paint any number of pictures, write any number of songs, go create a beautiful garden. There's all kinds of stuff that could happen. And then on the other side, the capacity of the deeper self and soul to become very still, to become very quiet and kind of move all that distraction and stuff away. Um, those to me, those are the 2 big pathways. And part of the emerging consciousness is going to come from those 2 practices.
I'm just, you know, taking it all in, you know, and feeling into, you know, what you're saying, taking that minute to like let it go from my thinking mind and really, you know, absorbing it into my feeling body, you know, sensing into what I'm hearing, what I'm feeling, what's coming out, you know, for me right now. And um and and it, it feels like a truth, I guess,
Mm.
is what I'm feeling. I feel like I'm hearing uh, the keys, you know, that can help us to unlock these personal, you know, barriers to that we sometimes set up for ourselves, you know. So
Well, we've had to set them up. That's one of the ideas of the wound in childhood. We set this up. We set up the ego structure in order not to be annihilated and overwhelmed when we were defenseless. And so then it turns out that what protected us early on can kill us later.
mhm, mhm,
And something you were saying there about the truth made me think of the idea that um, the antidote to the big lie, which is a problem cultures around the world right now, the antidote to the big lie is the living the truth of one's life. That's the antidote.
mm,
It's not finding the facts to disprove it. Those who are into the big lie don't accept the facts. The antidote is living genuinely from the inside who we are intended to be. And that's always a difficult road, but it's the worthwhile road.
yeah, yeah. I've heard you mention the term radical resilience. What do you mean by that?
Well, I got interested in the word resilience, and it literally means to bounce back. And so then people grab it from an ego point of view and think you got to just get right, stiff upper lip, and you got to get back in there. No, it actually has to do with birth. One of the representations of it is um, a seedling when it's curled over and it's pale green and it's brand new and it's trying to break through the hard earth in order to come out. That's a kind of resilience. And so it's really a reference back to what I was saying, that the soul is undaunted. If we can get to the depths of our self and soul, there's the natural resilience, a capacity not simply to bounce back, but to be born again, to touch into the origins. And so, in terms of the ancient and the immediate, um, the idea is in the depths of the soul, we find the origins of life and the both the authority that's missing in the world. That's a Greek word, authority. The beginning of it is the same root from which we get author, which means to make. So most people now think of authority as positional authority. You know, you're elected president, everybody's going to have to do what you say, kind of thing. That's positional authority. Genuine authority comes from the depths of the soul, from the origins of life. And so both genuine authority and resilient capacity come from getting in touch with the origins that are the deep ground of the soul, or the ground of being. And then creativity, originality comes from the origins, not from anything else. So all the trouble in the world, I think, is trying to push us deeper, and that's where the hidden resources are, in the depths of the soul. That's
Treasure
where the resilience is.
resilience. And so what is on a, what from this, deep knowing, from this deep of the soul, this place that we draw this inspiration and this authoring from, how has this helped you personally in, spiritual or practical ways?
Well, it really starts with that story of something erupting from some original space in me that
Yeah.
knew what to do, that I could try to be a fighter, but it wasn't going to work that well. I'd be better off learning the story world. And so it was like the inner realm of myth erupting.
Mhm.
And then on it, just being honest, it took me like 20 years to learn how to live with that. And so thinking of another story, it's almost like the other side of it. Years later, I had begun working with severely at-risk young people, particularly in the barrios and in the hood. And while I was doing that, I'd be in Chicago working with gang kids, and I'd be gone for 2 months. I'd come back, and the first thing they would tell me is, "Remember so and so? Yeah, well, he died. You know, so and so, he went to jail." And I just broke my heart. 16-year-old kids, 15-year-old kids, not only dying but trying to die sometimes. And I had to stop and say, how do I do this for real? What do I do? And so two things happened. I went to the oldest stories that are known. And so this is like following an inner voice. I went to the oldest stories to see what they said. And then I got to this idea that when I'm talking to a endangered young person, it may be the only time I can talk to them. What do I say? What do I talk about? And that's how I got back to genius. And I realized I'm going to say to each young person, because I may never see them again, do you know that you have genius? And to my great surprise, they would almost without exception say, what do you mean? And tell them, I don't, these are rough kids too sometimes. And all of a sudden we'd be talking about something that's in them, that's part of their soul. It was a saving grace for me, because I was being defeated by the tragedy. And then it became something of a grace for them. And um, so the idea of key images and ideas and then stories has always been showing me the way. You know, it was just a matter of how soon could I let myself be present to what was already present in me and in front of me.
Yeah, reflecting back, that genius in them that they didn't see and didn't know was there. And
Yeah, and that goes to the idea of mentoring, or whether it's doing therapy or whatever, being an elder or anything. And then I realized once I'm doing this, if I see the genius in it, particularly in a young person, which could be the genius for language or the genius for empathy, it could be all kinds of things. That's how it is. Genius, this multiple faceted thing. Uh, I had the responsibility to tell them I saw it. And the old idea was all young people are trying to get confirmed or blessed, and they're trying to release their genius, or they don't even know they're doing it, but they'll try it. And so then I had to learn this thing about being genuine and saying, I saw that. I just saw that. I see an aspect of your genius. Not doing that is to isolate young people who are already isolated. And then doing it makes you more perceptive about when the genius shows up. And so, yeah, that's been a huge learning path for me. And maybe there's an insight there that goes into this idea of how do we envision the next version of the world.
mm,
I think part of it involves us finding ways to bless each other's gifts and each other's genius and not be hesitant about that. I mean, if you think about it, you have a 50-50 chance of probably being right, you know, that's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is anytime we're even in a small way blessing someone else, that blessing comes back to us. You can feel blessed because you gave a blessing, not just because you received one. And so back to the idea from the beginning, everyone's gifted. And so giving things to people is a way of saying, I know you're gifted. Giving a gift is an acknowledgement that gifts exist. And so the opposite or the antidote to the materialistic consumer world is actually the gift giving world, and hopefully the gift blessing world. I think that's trying to show up somehow.
that's turned into gift giving, right?
Yeah.
That's interesting. And I find that gives us a space to believe in ourselves and to grow into that, to live into that bigger way of knowing ourselves that we didn't recognize.
Yeah. And usually the thing in the way, so here's an old idea. Um, if a person goes through a struggle, a difficult time, a great challenge, or a period of loss, they're either going to come out as a smaller person or a bigger person.
Right.
Well, we're all in the state of loss. We're all in the state of conflict and trouble. We're all in the state of confusion and misinformation and everything. And it's our choice. Do we come out of it as smaller people, or do we come out of it as bigger people? And no one is intended to have a small life. Some people will be kind of quiet, but that's their style. Empathic people are often quiet. It's not about being big and loud, it's being bigger in the soul, bringing more presence into the world, making creative agency possible. That's the calling for everyone. And how we answer has to do with our specific inner nature and the kind of thread of our soul.
Mm. Yeah, that that being able to do that all together and lift each other up and to make each other bigger together
Yeah. The
is
way a forest grows, the way nature does it, where everything is interactive and the things are mysteriously supporting each other. Even the things that are conflicting are actually part of a bigger organization of inclusion. And somehow we have to begin to take some of that on for our own benefit and for a way of reconnecting to the mystery of nature.
beautiful. Thank you so much. The way you tied it all together, I love all the layers that you bring and that you peel away. And I could listen to you forever. I love it. And you would, as it feels like a good time to bring this
Yeah.
completion. If would you like to share about how people could hear more of your stories and your books and more of your work?
We already mentioned the Living Myth podcast.
Yeah.
So that goes out free every week throughout the world, taking contemporary problems and issues and looking at them mythologically or psychologically, however it's appropriate at the time. And then mosaicvoices.org is the website, mosaicvoices, one word.org. And there are recordings to download, there's books, there's uh, free essays, there's just stuff to get connected. And the main thing uh, in many ways is mythic imagination. So I'll just end with this idea.
Oh yeah, I mean, I need to hear this.
So part of what's missing in the world is vertical imagination. Humans are here, our feet, as they used to say, walk the goat's earth, but our imagination is tied to the heavens and the stars. And we're supposed to be vertically connected. And that's how we get bigger, not necessarily wider, but vertically aligned. And the world is almost collapsed into a flat world. If you think about the internet and things like that, they're horizontally connected. And what we're often missing is the vertical connection. It's understandable. No one told us when we were young that our imagination is tied to the stars and the soles of our feet are connected to the soul of the world. No one told us that, but that's where we're trying to get to. And so what Mosaic, our organization, does is keep looking for the mythic imagination in all the troubles we're in and in all the moments that are trying to be born.
Beautiful, mythic imagination. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
I really am grateful for your time. And thanks for sharing your wisdom with us. I learned a lot. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Be well.
You
Be
too.
safe.
Thank you. You too.